2 Kings 18 is where we'll be today, at least to start. Today's going to be kind of a little bit of a different thing from what we've been doing, where in the past we've kind of camped out in one passage in Kings. This time we're going to look at 3 chapters, 2 Kings 18 through 20, which is all about Hezekiah. Hezekiah, the king of Judah. And we're going to look at kind of the big story of Hezekiah, because there's a sense in which to really get the point of each of these individual chapters, you really need to see it as part of the whole of Hezekiah's life and what his kingship was really all about. And, you know, this is one of those fundamental biblical interpretation ideas that to really understand any passage, you have to see it as part of the larger whole in which we find it. This idea that context is king. That's like a key rule in biblical interpretation. Context is king. And just to remember a little bit of the context before we dive into Hezekiah, you know the storyline, how I drew it like this, as kind of a downward spiral, and that there's actually 2 storylines, the northern kingdom and southern kingdom, which are going on simultaneously after Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, brings about this split. And, you know, one of the things we just saw last time was something very significant with regard to the northern kingdom. Anybody remember what the very previous chapter, 2 Kings 17, what did that tell us about with regard to the northern kingdom? Exile, yes. Yeah, so, you know, try to draw like an explosion here, you know. They crashed and burned here in 2 Kings 17. We've got exile. The nation has basically, as a nation, ceased to exist because the Assyrians have come through in God's perfect timing. God was very patient with them. We talked about this, how he waited hundreds of years to bring the judgment that he could well have brought well beforehand. But finally, the northern kingdom, Israel, their sins have caught up with them. And now we're wondering, now this is kind of the bigger story idea that will help us understand Hezekiah. Now we're wondering, what about Judah, the southern kingdom? What will be their fate? Their story yet continues. And we've heard a number of things in 2 Kings 17 to make us think this is not going to end well either. It said in 2 Kings 17, Judah was doing the same stuff that warranted Israel's demise. The same things are going on in Judah, the same idolatry. And even the king right before this, 2 Kings 16, with Ahaz, he's one of the wickedest kings yet. He's in Judah, the one who's sort of setting the standard in terms of wickedness. All right. All of that gets us ready now to read 2 Kings 18, starting in verse 1. So let's turn there. 2 Kings 18, starting in verse 1. Now it came about in the 3rd year of Hoshea, the son of Elah, king of Israel, that Hezekiah, the son of Ahaz, king of Judah, became king. He was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned 29 years in Jerusalem. That's a pretty long reign. And his mother's name was Abi, the daughter of Zechariah. He did right in the sight of the Lord according to all that his father David had done. So this is encouraging. Let me just turn this off because this thing is just louder than I thought it would be. This is encouraging. He did right according to all that David, his father, had done. First time we've ever heard that phrase in the whole book of Kings. Now, to really get verse 4, I need to read to you a bunch of other verses. Okay, so pause, and before we go any further, I need to read to you a bunch of other verses. 1 Kings 15:11. Asa did what was right in the sight of the Lord, but the high places were not taken away. 1 Kings 22, verse 43. Jehoshaphat walked in all the way of Asa his father. However, the high places were not taken away. The people still sacrificed and burned incense on the high places. 2 Kings 12, verses 2 and 3. Jehoash did right in the sight of the Lord all his days, in which Jehoiada the priest instructed him. Only the high places were not taken away. The people still sacrificed and burned incense on the high places. 2 Kings 14, verse 3. Amaziah did right in the sight of the Lord, yet not like David his father. He did according to all that Joash his father had done. Only the high places were not taken away. The people still sacrificed and burned incense on the high places. 2 Kings 15. Azariah, that is Uzziah, did right in the sight of the Lord, according to all that his father Amaziah had done. Only the high places were not taken away. The people still sacrificed and burned incense on the high places. 2 Kings 15, verse 34. This is incorrect. 2 Kings 15, verse 34. Jotham did right in the sight of the Lord. He did according to all that his father Uzziah had done. Only the high places were not taken away. The people still sacrificed and burned incense on the high places. Starting to get the idea, right? After we hear, he did right in the sight of the Lord, there's always this qualification about these southern kings that they didn't take away the high places. So what's the big deal about these high places? Anybody know? What's wrong with sacrificing, say, on a mountain or wherever? Yeah. Which is? Right. And in this case, part of what's so bad about the high places is that there are images associated with it. These poles, these Asherah poles, are one of the things that they have there, and they have these stones also. Wood and stone images that are direct infractions of the second commandment. Any other reasons why this is a problem? Yes, Nathan.
I have read that in many cases they were actually trying to worship God on those high places, but not in the way that God commanded.
Right. So that's part of the second commandment, is that it's not just who you worship, first commandment, you shall have no other gods before me, but it's how you worship the true God. So part of it is images, and that's not how God wants to be worshipped. He doesn't want us to use images in worship. And another part of it is Deuteronomy 12, where it says this, you shall, verse 2, utterly destroy all the places where the nations whom you shall dispossess serve their gods. Where do the nations, the Canaanites, serve their gods? On the high mountains, and on the hills, and under every green tree. And it talks about how they must obliterate these high places where the Canaanites worshipped. And he says this, verse 4 of Deuteronomy 12, you shall not act like this toward the Lord your God, but you shall seek the Lord at the place, the place, singular, the place which the Lord your God will choose from all your tribes, to establish his name there for his dwelling, and there you shall come. So how does God want to be worshipped? It's not just no images, that's a key part of this, but also what? What does Deuteronomy 12 say? One place. So Deuteronomy 12, at the one place where God chooses to establish his name. By now we know where that place is. As of Deuteronomy, it was not yet revealed, but by 2 Kings, it's very clearly been revealed. And where is that place?
The temple.
Yes, the temple. So, the temple in Jerusalem, that is explicitly said to be the place where God has established his name to dwell. So part of what's a problem with the high places is they're worshiping images there. They're acting like Canaanites, where these guys worshipped their gods wherever they wanted, and especially it was understood that a high place was a place where you could meet God. And so we have them even constructing artificial mountains. That's what these ancient ziggurats are all about. You've probably seen pictures of these stepped things. They're creating high places so that they can meet their gods. And it's almost like a portal between heaven and earth. The Canaanites worshipped this way, and God says, you're not supposed to do that. I'm the one who meets with you, and I'm going to establish my place where I'm going to come down and meet with you, the temple in Jerusalem. So all these good kings, otherwise good kings of Judea, did right in the sight of the Lord, yet they did not remove the high places. Now, with all this preface, I will finally read 2 Kings 18, verse 4. Verse 3, he did right in the sight of the Lord according to all his father David had done. He removed the high places. At this point, we should just put down our Bible and say, wait a second, am I reading this right? You've just read I just read 8 verses where they didn't remove the high places. Like, did they forget a knot? No, it's really true. I mean, at this point, we should be throwing a party. Like, he removed the high places. And what did he do? He broke down the sacred pillars, cut down the Asherah. There's those images. He also broke in pieces the bronze serpent that Moses had made. That was a good and honoring thing. God commanded it. When they were being bit by serpents, God made the bronze serpent so they could look at that serpent and live. It's a picture of Christ. But what happened? For until those days, the sons of Israel burned incense to it. They turned it into an idol, and it was called Nehushtan. So this is really exciting. Right after the exile of the northern kingdom, we're meeting a king like none other save David himself. And even more than David, look at this, verse 5. He trusted in the Lord, the God of Israel, so that after him there was none like him among all the kings of Judah, nor among those who were before him. For he clung to the Lord. He did not depart from following him, but kept his commandments, which the Lord had commanded Moses. And the Lord was with him. Wherever he went, he prospered. And he rebelled against the king of Assyria and did not serve him. He defeated the Philistines as far as Gaza and its territory, from watchtower to fortified city. So a lot of things here in these first verses about Hezekiah are encouraging, and even we could say unique. What are some things about Hezekiah that are unique that we are noticing here? Things the author wants us to recognize. Let's have a young person tell me something. There's tons of things that are unique about Hezekiah. What are some things from what we just read that make Hezekiah really stand out as special? Really young person. Yeah. So he cuts down the bronze serpent. This has clearly been going on for a long time. And Hezekiah is the first one who has the guts to say, no more. No more. Good. Any other things, anybody, that are unique, that these first verses make us want to see about Hezekiah? Things that make him stand out. Yeah, that one is an explicit, incomparability statement there. He's incomparable when it comes to trust. That is, of course, a really big deal. He is somebody who is particularly distinguished for his trust in the Lord, and that's going to be a central theme in what we see. We'll come back to that. Any other things you noticed that make this sound good?
The paraclete, that's what it looks like. It looks like the Holy Ghost is what we got.
Yeah. I mean, the sum of all these things is that clearly the Spirit is working in Hezekiah. Especially you think about Hezekiah, he's the son of Ahaz, who's one of the most wicked, right? And it's extraordinary that from this wicked king who's just off the deep end in terms of sin, that there would be this righteous guy. Yeah. We're going to hear about.
So he had two good.
Oh well, no, that's true. Yeah, and actually that one about the story about Joash, shows us how this can happen, where Joash is kind of brought up by not the wicked parents, well, in this case, the wicked person who's running the land, Athaliah, but Jehoiada, this priest who does really love the Lord. So that's part of what explains how this reversal can happen. Other things you noticed. Well, let me just point out a couple other things. Did I hear? Yeah, go ahead. Oh, okay. Yeah, notice what it says in verse 7. The Lord was with him. Wherever he went, he prospered. To this point, we have not seen this kind of success since the days of David. Look at this. He defeated the Philistines as far as Gaza and its territory. That kind of victory against the Philistines we haven't seen that since David's day. In fact, victory over the Philistines is something that has yet to happen in the just general conquest of the land. God gave the Philistine territory, if you go all the way back to the book of Joshua, God gave the Philistine territory to Judah. They never took it. They never took it because of the military might of the Philistines and the lack of trust in the Lord here with who cares how much military might they have if God is with them, but they didn't trust him. They didn't fight in fear of him. So this is really encouraging. And even there's a few little other hints here that this is encouraging. That thing where it says he has success wherever he'll go, that reminds us of 2 Samuel 7. By the way, what happens in this chapter? 2 Samuel 7. Yes. This is one of those verses where I'll keep quizzing you on this until you all instantly shout out to me, the Davidic covenant, God's covenant with David. Yes, God's making this promise to David, and what he says in verse 9 of 2 Samuel 7 is basically the same promise. I'll be with you wherever you go, success wherever you go. Hezekiah is being portrayed here as this new David who is trusting God. That was what was at stake in David's battle with Goliath, the Philistine. And now here's this new David who's on the scene. And even he is being portrayed here as the anti-Solomon. For look at this. There's this special word, cling. Anybody remember how this was used in Solomon's passage? We talked about this. Solomon clung to his wives, who led him astray. What does Hezekiah cling to? It's the same Hebrew word here. He clings to the Lord. So there's this, picking up on this special word, cling, used only a couple times in Kings, and here, very important, Hezekiah is clinging to the Lord, not to these foreign women. Well, one last thing I want to draw our attention to, and it is this. This is kind of like thrown in there, and you're like, how does this fit in? Verse 7, second half. The first half is, and the Lord was with him. Wherever he went, he prospered. And then it says this, and he rebelled against the king of Assyria and did not serve him. You're like, rebelled. Is that a good thing? Is that a good thing? Rebelled against Assyria. Anybody? What would you think about this? Is it a good thing for him to rebel against Assyria?
Great.
Why is it great?
Because if he is with God, he will see mother.
Yes, that's right. So it reflects of his trust here.
Everybody else allied with it then.
Yes, everybody else, including the previous king, Ahaz, is trying to make friends with and basically do everything he can to keep the Assyrians off his back. So think about this. Assyria, what did they just do? They just destroyed the northern kingdom. I mean, like your neighbor next door to you up north, like Samaria, which is an extremely heavily fortified city, has fallen to the Assyrian horde, okay? And they're just decimated. And you basically have seen this practically with your own eyes. Okay? It wouldn't be like hearsay. You would have known that this is happening. You probably would have seen the smoke rising from northern kingdom cities from the Assyrian horde destroying them. Okay, so now here's this guy in this really small kingdom. At this point, Judah is not a superpower at all. Long gone are the days of Solomon. He rebels against Assyria. That shows some serious trust. But here's the thing I'm still wanting to hear. Why is it so good for him to do this? Why should he do this? What's wrong with being a vassal kingdom of Assyria? Good. Yes. He wants his people for his own. And how do you know that?
Because he said so. It's a promise.
Yep.
He delivered them
He delivered them from...
from the, even from the exile.
Well, from bondage in Egypt. What was the point of that? You will serve nobody but me. The whole point of this whole thing, when God brings them to Sinai, is you will be my vassal kingdom. I'm the high king. You are under me and serving me as it was always meant to be from the beginning of the world. No more oppressors over you. Instead, we have God as your king. And Assyria is now basically becoming this new Egypt superpower. And they are ruling and oppressing Israel. And the question is, do you believe that the Lord really is interested in preserving the freedom of his people? Do you really believe, do you really trust him that he can defeat the Assyrians? Well, this is about to be put to the test here, as we see in Act 2 here. So this is sort of Act 1 about Hezekiah. We could say that the first verses here is an auspicious start. Auspicious, that's one of those SAT words right there. Auspicious start means that it's promising. The future's looking good with a king like this. Okay, but now we read in the next section of a test of this trust in verse 9. Actually, we'll kind of skip over this. Let's go down to verse 13, chapter 18, verse 13. Now, in the 14th year of King Hezekiah, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, here's those Assyrians. Now, in the 14th year of King Hezekiah, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, came up against all the fortified cities of Judah and seized them. What's at stake when you rebel against Assyria? This. Okay? This is why they didn't want to do this before. Then King Hezekiah of Judah, king of Judah, sent to the king of Assyria at Lachish, saying, I have done wrong. Withdraw from me. Whatever you impose on me, I will bear. So the king of Assyria required of Hezekiah, king of Judah, 300 talents of silver and 30 talents of gold. We're talking like huge chests of money, okay? This is an enormous sum. Hezekiah gave him all the silver which was found in the house of the Lord and in the treasuries of the king's house. At that time Hezekiah cut off all the gold from the doors of the temple of the Lord and from the doorposts which Hezekiah, king of Judah, had overlaid, and gave it to the king of Assyria. So, what are we to make of this? The author doesn't pass judgment on this. He just records it for us. What are we to make of this act of Hezekiah? Say again? Rebellious?
No, his rebellion stopped.
Oh, his rebellion stopped. Yes. Yes, his rebellion has suddenly stopped. So if we were evaluating this as a good thing before, we must be thinking this is not good, right? What about this is not good? Obviously, his rebellion has stopped. He says, I did the wrong thing. I'll pay whatever you want.
No, it's showing a distrust in the Lord.
How so?
Well, he felt that the Lord is going to be with him, so he could hold himself against the Assyrians.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, they came and conquered his people, his land.
Exactly.
So he's saying, the Lord's not with me. Or at least he may be concluding that.
Yeah.
So he's giving up.
Exactly. And he's doing what all the other kings to this point have done. What's the thing that's so onerous about having these huge kingdoms, these huge empires? over you? Well, it's what we just see here portrayed to us. What does it mean to have an empire over you? It means you pay tribute big time. And this is not just a one-time thing. This is, obviously a huge penalty for having rebelled. But he would have had to pay every single year, the very cream of all that he's got. It all is going to go straight to Nineveh.
Can you describe your property tax?
There are some analogies. Right? So there's this initial test of his trust. What will he trust in? Will it be his ability to basically pay off the bully? Or will it be in the Lord, even when, at this point, every city now has fallen of Judah? Lachish is one of the great fortified cities of Judah. And when that falls, you're in big trouble. Okay? Everything has fallen except Jerusalem. Not of truth, of trust. That's what I'm trying to say. Trust. Okay. And what is his decision? Is he going to trust the Lord, or is he going to trust in his ability and his money, basically, his ability to pay off the Assyrians? Well, here's a failure now on Hezekiah's part, especially on the level of trust. So, what's the result of this? He tries to pay off the Assyrians. What happens next? Well, instead of them going away, it says this, that he brought this, the king of Assyria basically sent his representatives with a large army to Jerusalem. Verse 17, the king of Assyria sent Tartan and Rabsaris and Rabshakeh from Lachish to King Hezekiah with a large army to Jerusalem. So he wanted to buy these people off. And he instead just gets the army coming right up to his door now. And now we have what is one of the most powerful speeches in the whole of Kings. This speech of Rabshakeh, he's an emissary from the king of Assyria. And I just want to draw a few things out here. And tell me if some of these words start to leap off the page now that we have this context. Rabshakeh says to them, "Say now to Hezekiah." This is him basically outside the city, and he's speaking to all the people listening on the city walls. You can picture them. They're all inside, hoping to be safe, but there's this huge army, and here are the emissaries talking. "Say now to Hezekiah, thus says the great king, the king of Assyria." What is this confidence that you have? The NASB, which I'm reading, has confidence. I think ESV has what? Trust. Okay, here's where I think ESV did a better job than NASB, because that word is very much connected to what we just saw in verse 5. He trusted in the Lord. Okay, so now there's this theme of trust coming up. What is this trust that you have? You say, but they are only empty words. I have counsel and strength for war. Now, on whom do you rely? Now, isn't that the question? On whom do you rely that you have rebelled against me? And now he treats two possible options of what they could be relying on. Now, behold, you rely on this staff of this crushed reed, even on Egypt, on which if a man leans, it will go into his hand and pierce it. So is Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to all who rely on him. So what's one possible trust that they may have where they feel like they can stay safe in the city? I heard somebody.
Other allies?
Yes, other allies, yes. So are they going to trust in other nations, powerful allies, that they have basically paid to come and defend them? Is that going to be a trust? Well, he says this is like this reed that if you were to lean on, it actually goes through your hand. A vivid picture of pain from a false thing to trust on. And then what's this other thing he suggests? Verse 22. But if you say to me, we trust in the Lord our God. That sounds like a good idea, right? Well, look what he says next. Is it not he whose high places and whose altars Hezekiah has taken away, and has said to Judah and to Jerusalem, you shall worship before this altar in Jerusalem? What's he saying? What's the point of him saying that? You trust in the Lord?
Well, mentioned in other places that are their gods, not
Right.
the,
Good. Good. But remember what we were saying before. It was not just that they sometimes worshipped other gods at the high places. They also worshipped the Lord himself at these high places. And in fact, many of these high places were dedicated to the Lord. But they were still displeasing to the Lord because he wants to be worshipped in Jerusalem. Now, what's Rabshakeh doing by saying, hey, you guys are trusting the Lord? Look, isn't it his altars that you guys took down?
Yeah, if you think in the pagan way, like the Assyrians were, that these altars were portals to God and
Right.
avenues for his power to go forth. It's like, well, Hezekiah's cut off those
Yeah.
avenues of power.
Yeah, you want to show, you want to dishonor a God, you destroy the places where he's worshipped. Well, Hezekiah, did he dishonor God by destroying those places? No. Why? Because God commanded them to worship him there. But you would only know that if you were really steeped in Deuteronomy and if you really knew what God had spoken. And so what is he doing here? He's trying to turn the people against the Lord and against Hezekiah by basically playing off of their being misinformed about what pleases the Lord. For many of those people standing on the walls of Jerusalem, they probably thought, what is Hezekiah doing? You know, if we want God to be pleased with us, we should be keeping these high places. Right? If they don't understand what God has in fact commanded them, then Rabshakeh's speech makes a ton of sense. Because now he's saying, you know why the Assyrians are here? It's because we abandoned the Lord. You know why Assyria took all of the cities except Jerusalem? It's because the Lord is angry with us for removing his high places. Not so, but you can see why he might think of it. Now, look at this. He's saying, make and bargain with my master, the king of Assyria. In other words, don't trust allies, don't trust the Lord. Make a bargain with the king of Assyria. And keep listening. He says this, have I not, verse 25, have I not now come up without the Lord's approval against this place to destroy it? Oh no, I have his approval. The Lord said to me, go up against this land and destroy it. Again, what's kind of true about that? When he says, you guys are trusting in the Lord actually commanded me to come up against this place. What's kind of true about that? He was commanded to go up against the northern kingdom. And in fact, we have explicit revelation in Isaiah that is basically to this very effect, that God did send them against the northern kingdom, but not against the southern kingdom, not yet. And yet, if you don't know the Bible, if you don't know what God has actually spoken, then you would be taken in by this, and the lies start compounding themselves, and you're like, oh man, now we've really done it. God actually has sent Assyria against us. So you see the power of this. And not only that, but there's just the basic idea of verse 24. How can you repulse one official of the least of my master's servants? In other words, you guys, your military might is not a worthwhile trust either. We can certainly defeat you even with the least of our servants. And so, it's all about trust. Verse 29, do not let Hezekiah deceive you, for he will not be able to deliver you from my hand, nor let Hezekiah make you trust in the Lord, saying the Lord will surely deliver us. Don't listen to them, he's saying, verse 31. Instead, make peace with me, and look at the promise, verse 31. Make peace with me, and eat each of his vine, and each of his fig tree, and drink each of the waters of his own cistern, until I come and take you away to a land like your own land, a land of grain and new wine, a land of bread and vineyards, a land of olive trees and honey, that you may live and not die. What does that remind you of? Satan in the garden, big time. But even just the language right there. Those are covenant promises. Here, trust in Assyria. He's going to be the guy who will give you the land. And it's the same thing as the garden, isn't it? Satan promising what only God can give, turning us against God, and offering us the blessings on his terms. Of course, this is a complete farce, right? What, the king of Assyria is going to take you to some nice land? He's going to enslave you, right? But you can see the power of this speech. Do you think Rob Shaka knows the Bible? Do you think he read his intelligence reports? I think so. I think this guy, and not only that, but we know that he's speaking Hebrew. This guy learned Judean, the dialect. He learned it, and afterwards they're like, please don't speak to us in Hebrew. Please speak to us in Aramaic, for we understand it. We don't want the people hearing this. And he's like, I'm speaking in Hebrew, because I want to take all of you in to trust me and trust Assyria and not trust the Lord. Well, what's Hezekiah's response? What is Hezekiah's response here? It is Act 3 now. And I'm kind of simplifying. There's a couple other incidents that happened in between this. But basically, this message is reiterated with an extra force to it, which I think was actually in the original one too. The reminder that, oh, by the way, Assyria has destroyed every other nation that it's come up against. What makes you think you're so special? Where are the gods of all these other nations? Look at, thank you. Yeah, verse 33. Where are these other gods? Have they delivered their land from the king of Assyria? Where are the gods of Hamath and Arpad? And he lists all these other places. Have they delivered Samaria? Well, now we come to a really dramatic moment. Possibly one of the most powerful moments in the entire book of Kings, where Hezekiah has received these words, and what does he do? Verse 14 of chapter 19. Chapter 19, verse 14. He's basic. Assyria has defied God. And what is Hezekiah's response as he's basically holed up in Jerusalem under siege? He takes the letter from the hand of the messengers and read it, and he went up to the house of the Lord and spread it out before the Lord. Hezekiah prayed before the Lord and said, and this is really amazing, O Lord, the God of Israel, who are enthroned above the cherubim, you are the God, you alone, of all the kingdoms of the earth. You have made heaven and earth. Incline your ear, O Lord, and hear. Open your eyes, O Lord, and see, and listen to the words of Sennacherib, which he has sent to reproach the living God. And then he talks about what they've done. And now, verse 19, Now, O Lord our God, I pray, deliver us from his hand, that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that you alone, O Lord, our God. All the other kingdoms, verses 17 and 18, had gods that were not actually gods. But Hezekiah says, you are really God. So show yourself to be really God. What are we to make of this prayer? This is trust, right? This is trust like nothing else we've seen to this point. Now, let me ask you something. Obviously, this is a good prayer in a lot of ways. What are some ways that this prayer comes off as being deeply good and deeply trusting? Think about connections to the whole of Kings, or just things that stand out to you in that very passage. Here's a little hint. Where is he praying? In the temple. Why is that significant?
Because Solomon's prayer.
Solomon's prayer. Thank you. Yes, Solomon's prayer. He's praying in the temple. Where else have we seen prayer in the temple? 1 Kings 8 was Solomon's prayer. Remember how I told you this is a really important passage. A really important passage. And remember what Solomon prayed about the temple. He said, O Lord, what? What's the gist of what he said? Yes. Yes. When your people are in distress and they pray, then what does he say? Then hear and see. What is Hezekiah praying? O Lord, hear. Verse 16. O Lord, see. He clearly knows what Solomon prayed, and he's praying that prayer back to God again, especially because one of the very petitions that Solomon prayed about was, when your people are in distress and are defeated before an enemy, and because they've sinned against you, and they turn and make supplication to you in this house, what Hezekiah is doing, then hear and forgive and bring them back, deliver them. So this is pretty amazing. In fact, Hezekiah's prayer, Solomon's prayer, and then David's prayer in 2 Samuel 7 are the only prayers uttered by kings in all of Samuel through Kings. So this is a pretty climactic moment here where Hezekiah is really trusting God. Glorious. Any thoughts on this or ways in which this stands out to you, what he's doing? It really gets to the nature of trust, doesn't it? I've been always wanting to get to application in our times together, and I always feel like we're running out of time. But I have a couple more pieces I want to bring up here, but I want to at least make sure I touch on this. What does this whole sequence show us about trust? What are some aspects of biblical trust that we learn from this?
Well, in a summary, I would say he had trust, then he lacked trust, and now he has no other place to go but to trust. Yeah. God really kind of made it even more desperate. So that, he could have still done other things. He could have surrendered or whatever and hoped for the best. But yeah, God turned up the heat, and the guy whom Hezekiah really is, deep down, came out. And it was a man of trust. Very good. Yeah.
Hezekiah's trust was rooted in God's promises.
Okay, how do you see that?
He invokes the promises, covenant promises made to Israel. He
Yeah.
invokes Solomon's prayers and the promises God had given them.
It is deeply informed by God's Word. And we didn't get a chance to read this, but he even is receiving revelation from Isaiah the prophet, who is his contemporary, and who is encouraging him. You could just look up in chapter 19, where Isaiah says, "Thus says the Lord," verse 6, "Do not be afraid because of the words which you've heard, with which the servants of the king of Assyria have blasphemed me." And he gives an assuring promise there. Yeah, both old revelation and recent. What is he clinging to when he's praying? He's clinging to what God has said he is, what he has promised he will do. His whole prayer is conditioned on God being real and not like those false gods of the nations, and that God really will keep his word when he does what he's told to do. Right? So I think both of those things are really important, especially when we see what is Rabshakeh doing. He's taking them away from the Word to things that are much more tangible and right in front of you. What's right in front of them? A massive army. What is not visible to the eyes? God's promises. What will he trust in? Well, the army, as we're about to see, is not worthy of your trust. And that's what we read now in 2 Kings 19, verse 35. This is God's delivering on his promises. Unfortunately, we don't have time to read this marvelous answer of God through Isaiah. But yeah, did I see your hand, Ryan?
So you made the point that only 2 kings have prayers recorded here, and those 2 kings are kings that were seeking to follow the Lord. And
Yeah.
I think that is a poignant
Yeah.
part of that trust. They didn't just have the head knowledge of
Good.
the
Yes.
promises of God. They actually were wrestling, as it were, with the Lord in prayer.
Yes. Yes, excellent. And that prayer was really the pinnacle of their expression of their trust. And as we're about to see, it's the most powerful thing. You think prayer is not that powerful, but it's actually the most powerful thing you could have possibly asked for, because what does Isaiah basically say in all of this? Assyria has defied me. And verse 32, therefore he will not come to this city or shoot an arrow there. He will not come before it with a shield or throw up a siege ramp against it. By the way he came, by the same he will return, and he will not come to this city, declares the Lord. For I will defend this city to save it for my own sake and for my servant David's sake. In other words, because of the promises which I've staked my own reputation on, especially the promise to David. Verse 35. Then it happened that night that the angel of the Lord went out and struck 185,000 in the camp of the Assyrians. And when men arose early in the morning, behold, all of them were dead. So Sennacherib, king of Assyria, departed and returned home and lived at Nineveh. It came about as he was worshiping in the house of Nisroch, his god. Interesting, right? Two kings, both of them in their houses, right? In the houses of their gods. That Adramelech and Sharezer killed him with the sword, his sons, actually. And they escaped into the land of Ararat. And Esarhaddon, his son, became king in his place. So, what's the fallout of all of this? What's Act 4? Anybody? Yeah, God answered. God answered the prayer in an astonishing way. And by the way, an angel of death killing an enormous amount of people so that the once powerful guy goes home with his tail between his legs. Wherever you heard that? Yes, exactly. It's a new Exodus story, right? A new Exodus-like deliverance. Is God still the God of the Exodus? Is he still able to do what he did in Egypt? Oh, yes. Oh, yes. And in fact, he does this miraculous reversal. This is like when you're down by 300 points and there's one second left, and somehow you get, what would it be, 150 baskets or something, Impossible, right? But it has actually happened here. Now, I want you to think about one last thing. As we're trying to take in all of Hezekiah, obviously we see amazing trust, God answering, new Exodus. Now we have the fact that the story is not quite over. And in Act 5, the final act for Hezekiah, we have a bad epilogue. A bad epilogue. At this point, we're looking at this like, wow, Judah's back in the game. These guys have done... Look at this amazing faith, this amazing trust on the part of Hezekiah. Look what God has done to deliver them. The great big bad enemy has been thwarted. And now we're wondering, is this a resurrection? Is Judah basically back from the dead in the ultimate sense? Or is this sort of more of like a revivification? Is he getting an extra lease on life, but he's going to die again eventually? Exile will still come? Or is it a complete turnaround? Is this the beginning of what we were always hoping for? There are some scholars who even say that an early edition of Kings was written, ending at chapter 19, basically to say Hezekiah is the Messiah. And you can understand why they say that. Obviously, he's already to this point shown himself to be imperfect. He's not the guy, right? But now, in case you hadn't gotten that part yet, we have chapter 20. And it's interesting. It starts with another little story about an extra lease on life, where Hezekiah himself becomes mortally ill. And he gets an extra 15 years added to his life. But guess what? He still dies. And ironically, this is one of the deepest, darkest ironies of Kings. It will be in those 15 years that Manasseh is born. So we'll come back to that. But anyway, what happens at the very end, at the end of all of this time? Well, he gets better. God mercifully hears his prayer once more and enables him to have 15 more years of his life. And guess who comes to pay a glad you got well visit? Well, it's the Babylonians. First time we've seen them in a really long time in the Bible. Really, it's their reemergence on the scene of history as the Assyrian power at this point is starting to crack and starting to wane. We have, that's partially true. Esarhaddon is a really powerful king, and there's still going to be quite a bit of power from Assyria for another several decades. But here's this faraway guy coming, Berodach Baladan, the son of Baladan, king of Babylon, sending letters and a present to Hezekiah, for he had heard that Hezekiah had been sick. And Hezekiah takes him in, and he's like, oh, these guys are from so far away. I'm going to show them around. Because, I'm kind of like Solomon. I'm going to show them around, just like Solomon showed off all his treasures to the Queen of Sheba. I'm going to show them all my stuff. And Hezekiah at this point has regained much of the treasure that he had lost. And we see these amazing storehouses. What's the irony of all this? The Babylonians are going to go back and say, hey guys, when we're planning that long conquest, let's make sure Judah's on that trip, because we want all the stuff he just showed us. And what does God say here to Hezekiah because of his pride? Isaiah once more comes, this time not with a word of comfort, but instead this. Behold, the days are coming, verse 17, when all that is in your house, in other words, all the treasure you just showed off that you're so proud of, and all that your fathers have laid up in store to this day, will be carried to Babylon. Nothing shall be left, says the Lord. Some of your sons who shall issue from you, whom you will beget, will be taken away, and they will become officials in the palace of the king of Babylon. Maybe the ESV has a different translation. They may have eunuchs. Yeah. In other words, the end of your line. The end of your line. They will be made eunuchs in the palace of Babylon. So, what are we to make of this sort of bad epilogue? Why do you think this is important? This fact that Hezekiah, he began so well, but he ended poorly.
Well, you didn't read verse 19, which I think is probably the epitome of his heart.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you for bringing this to our attention.
Where he basically said, okay, it's not going to hit me.
At least it doesn't happen in my days. I'll have peace and truth. Yeah, and just like, don't you care?
Right.
Yeah, what were you going to say, Linda?
I just had a question. I always wondered about Hezekiah and that prayer. Would it have been better for Hezekiah to just accept the Lord's, I don't know, when he first came to him and said,
Yeah.
your affairs in order, you're going to die, and just accept that?
Oh, yeah. Interesting. Yeah, when you're talking about now his second prayer, when he was sick, and God says, get your affairs in order, you're about to die. Yeah, that's a great question. I'd have to think about that. Obviously, he's not... I think there's a lot of parallels between him getting sick, all seems lost, he prays, he gets an extra lease on life, and what has just happened in all seemed lost with the nation. They're surrounded by by the Assyrians. They're about to go down in a ball of flames. He prays. God gives Judah an extra lease on life. Like those two stories, I think are parallel. Was it wrong for him to pray for Judah to live? I mean, I don't think so. Even though it looked like the noose was about to go around their neck. Was it wrong for him to pray for his own part? I'm not sure. I don't know. Yeah, I don't see why it wouldn't be if he had. I mean, I guess the thing that throws me off, I guess, a little bit on it is the fact that he was told by God, it's over. Like, get ready to die. And as we're about to see, there's going to come a point where God is going to say to the nation, it's over, get ready to die. And it will be the people who rebel at that point who are sinful. Contrast to Hezekiah, who rebelled and it was righteous. And it will be those who capitulate to the Babylonians who will be the righteous ones, because God has pronounced the death sentence. So, yeah, that's a tricky one. Thank you for asking that. I'll have to think about that. I mean, at least one thing we could say about this bad epilogue, is what we were talking about before. Hezekiah, he's not the guy. He is not the great son of David that we were looking for ever since 2 Samuel 7, this son that will arise. No, he does really well. But even he is not enough to reverse the path of history. No, Judah will now face the same fate as Israel. So now let's just think about this as we're considering this story as a whole. If you can think about all 5 acts here with regard to Hezekiah, we always want to ask, where's Christ in this? And since time is short, I'm just going to remind you of one thing you can always do when you're trying to ask this question. Because at this point you may be saying, man, I'm seeing lots of important themes about trust and things, but I'm not really seeing like things that would make me immediately think of Christ. Well, one thing you can do is you can go through each thing that has happened and think about, how is Christ like the person under perspective here, and how is he not like him? So Hezekiah, he has a great start, but he ends poorly. Jesus Christ is faithful to the end. And Philippians makes a really big deal of this. He was obedient even, it says, to the point of death on the cross. Even when it became extremely bitter, he still was faithful. Hezekiah was the guy who trusted like nobody